Hard work was that relentless fifth, sixth gear, standing in front of a tiny team and remaining as an example where you're focusing on their weaknesses, offloading everything you've got.
The truth. Gordon Ramsay revealed about David Dempsey's death began with a final dinner, 3 sudden resignations, and a friend who seemed unlike himself. Weeks later, an inquest heard a precise cocaine concentration. Years later, Ramsay was still confronting substances inside restaurant culture. Yet the accusation that he had caused his close friend and protégé's death was never what the 2003 record established. So who blamed Ramsay? And what did the evidence reveal about that fatal Chelsea night instead? The accusation the 2003 record never made. Nobody had explicitly blamed Gordon Ramsay. That was the distinction an independent profile drew in October 2003 after the inquest into David Dempsey's death. Ramsay was being questioned about pressure inside his kitchen and about the disagreement he had with Dempsey the previous evening. But scrutiny was not the same thing as an accusation, and it certainly was not a finding that he had caused the death. The timeline makes that clear. Dempsey died after falling several stories at a Chelsea apartment block in the early hours of May 4, 2003. 5 days later, Ramsay's company issued a statement describing the 31-year-old chef as his friend, protégé, a natural leader, and a gifted Scottish chef. Those were the words of an employer mourning someone he had trusted for years, not the language of a man answering a formal charge. There are 4 different ideas here, and the story changes when they get blended together. Workplace scrutiny asks whether an intense environment contributed to a crisis. Survivor's guilt is the painful feeling that you should have seen something or done more. A formal accusation says a person bears responsibility. A coroner's finding decides what the evidence supports about the death. The reporting documented scrutiny and Ramsay's distress, but neither became a formal accusation. The October profile did not dismiss the uncomfortable questions. It examined whether Dempsey had been pushed toward breaking point and whether the pressure of Ramsay's kitchen mattered. That is serious. It is also narrower than saying Ramsay drove Dempsey to take cocaine or caused what happened later that night. The profile did not report a charge, lawsuit, or formal finding against Ramsay. That distinction also protects Dempsey from becoming a prop in someone else's scandal. The contemporary statement presented a respected chef and trusted colleague, not merely the victim in a celebrity blame story. If a 2003 profile says questions were raised, but nobody blamed Ramsay outright, does a later title claiming he was blamed reveal the truth or create a new accusation? The more honest answer is that Ramsay stood close enough to the tragedy for people to ask whether his workplace played a role. He was Dempsey's employer, mentor, and close friend. That proximity made the questions emotionally powerful. It did not make them proven. Over time, though, the distinction became easy to lose. Concern sounded like blame, grief sounded like confession, and a difficult final conversation sounded like evidence of responsibility. That distinction matters, but it does not explain why questions about Ramsay's kitchen gained traction at all. The answer lies in who Dempsey was before he became a tragic headline, a cancer survivor, a Michelin-starred leader, and the man Ramsay had just trusted with his most demanding restaurant. How did an 8-year protégé reach the summit of British cooking only weeks before everything collapsed? 8 years to a 3-star kitchen. He reached it through 8 years of trust, hard kitchens, and a record strong enough for Ramsay to hand him extraordinary responsibility. By the time David Dempsey died at 31, he was not an apprentice living in Gordon Ramsay's shadow. He had led Amaryllis in Glasgow, helped the restaurant earn Michelin recognition, and had only recently taken charge of restaurant Gordon Ramsay at Royal Hospital Road in Chelsea. A Forbes profile published on August 14, 2002, captured him while he was alive and running Amaryllis at age 30. It traced his training under 2 mentors, Gordon Ramsay and Raymond Blanc, including time at Blanc's Le Manoir aux Quatre Saisons. That background matters because Dempsey had already learned the standards of elite restaurants before Ramsay returned him to London. He was being trusted because he had delivered before. His food showed a chef with an identity of his own. The 2002 profile described roast scallops with cauliflower puree and venison served with bitter chocolate sauce. And his career had already survived a far more personal test. According to contemporary reporting, Dempsey had overcome Hodgkin lymphoma at 22, then returned to kitchens demanding long hours, control, and consistency. When Ramsay's company announced Dempsey's death in May 2003, it said the two men had worked together for 8 years. It also credited Dempsey with inspiring the launch of Amaryllis and described him as a natural leader. That makes the relationship easier to understand. Friendship was part of it, but so were mentorship, loyalty, and the kind of professional confidence that puts another person in charge of your reputation. There is one important distinction in how that achievement should be described. Michelin stars are awarded to restaurants, not personally owned by individual chefs. So Dempsey should be remembered as the head chef who led Michelin-starred Amaryllis and was then chosen to run a 3-Michelin-star restaurant, not as someone borrowing Ramsay's fame. His work had earned its own attention. That is what makes the timing so difficult. Dempsey had beaten cancer, built a reputation in Glasgow, and reached one of the most demanding posts in British cooking. Yet the promotion was still new when he died. It can be read as proof of Ramsay's faith in him, and it can also explain why questions about professional pressure felt impossible to ignore. What it cannot do is prove that pressure caused his later cocaine use. That rise makes the next evidence harder to dismiss as ordinary career turbulence. Dempsey had not arrived at Royal Hospital Road as an untested outsider. He arrived as Ramsay's proven lieutenant. Yet, on the evening before the fatal fall, Ramsay said the man across from him seemed changed, and their conversation centered on a sudden staffing crisis. What happened at that final dinner that transformed professional pressure into a warning remembered at the inquest? 3 resignations at the final dinner. 3 resignations were on the table when Ramsay last sat down with David Dempsey. At the July 2003 inquest hearing, Ramsay testified that they had been discussing 3 employees who had resigned, a serious staffing problem for a chef who had only recently taken control of Royal Hospital Road. Ramsay also said Dempsey appeared under pressure and looked unlike himself. That was the warning later remembered, but it was still only an observation. Ramsay could describe what he saw across the table. He could not diagnose Dempsey from a conversation, and the inquest evidence does not turn an unusual demeanor into proof of what was happening medically. The dinner gives the story a sequence. It does not give it a cause. And that gap between what was seen and what was known is crucial, especially once the death was investigated. Hours later, in the early hours of May 4, 2003, Dempsey became involved in a chaotic incident at a Chelsea apartment block. He fell from an upper-story window to a basement patio and died from his injuries. Contemporary accounts disagree about the building's exact name and the height of the fall, so any neat figure would create certainty the surviving record does not provide. The aftermath placed Ramsay inside the tragedy in a deeply personal way. In a later independent interview, he described being asked by police to identify Dempsey's body. He also indicated that the experience changed how he thought about how long young chefs should remain working under him before moving forward in their own careers. That was reflection after a loss, not an admission of legal responsibility. If a trusted colleague seemed unlike himself during a meeting about 3 resignations, would you recognize a genuine crisis without knowing that substances were involved? This is where hindsight becomes dangerous. Once you know how the night ended, every earlier detail can feel like a warning that should have been obvious. The promotion starts to look like crushing pressure. The disagreement starts to sound like a trigger. Ramsay's concern starts to resemble foreknowledge. None of those interpretations is established by the timeline itself. What the evidence does establish is narrower and more haunting. Dempsey had just reached a demanding new position. 3 employees had resigned. Ramsay believed he seemed changed during their last dinner. By the early hours of the next morning, Dempsey was dead. Those facts explain why people questioned the pressure around him, while leaving the central medical question unanswered. Those facts explain why pressure became part of the story. but they still cannot explain Dempsey's behavior or establish who, if anyone, bore responsibility. That required evidence no dinner companion could see: a laboratory concentration, 2 named medical witnesses, and a coroner's final ruling. When the toxicology number was read at Westminster Coroner's Court, how far beyond the stated severe toxicity level was it? The 1.36 milligrams per liter finding. It was 0.46 milligrams per liter above the comparison presented at the inquest. Dr. Nicholas Lemos testified that David Dempsey's blood contained 1.36 milligrams of cocaine per liter, while 0.9 milligrams per liter was described as a concentration capable of indicating severe toxicity. As a simple arithmetic comparison, the reported level was roughly 51% higher. Milligrams per liter measures concentration, meaning how much of a substance was detected within a given volume of blood. It does not reveal the exact quantity Dempsey consumed, precisely when he consumed it, or how every other person would respond to the same reading. And 0.9 was not presented as a universal lethal threshold. The number was evidence of severe danger, not a formula that predicts one identical outcome. The attribution matters. Lemos was identified at Westminster Coroner's Court as head of toxicology at St. George's Hospital in Tooting, London. In other words, the central measurement did not come from rumor or Ramsay's memory. It was toxicology evidence presented by the named specialist responsible for explaining what had been detected in Dempsey's blood. The final inquest also heard from Dr. John Henry, identified at the hearing as an expert on cocaine and ecstasy at St. Mary's Hospital in Paddington. He described a cocaine-related state that could involve confusion, paranoia, hallucinations, and aggression toward glass. The historical expression used in that 2003 testimony was excited delirium. It should remain tied to what the hearing was told then, not treated as an uncontested diagnosis today. On September 23, 2003, Westminster coroner Paul Knapman recorded accidental death. The careful wording is that Dempsey died from injuries sustained in the fall after taking a dangerously high quantity of cocaine. Calling it simply an overdose leaves out the immediate cause recorded in the case. Saying Ramsay caused it goes further still because the coroner made no such finding. That ruling does not erase every question about pressure, workplace culture, or whether warning signs were missed. It does settle the legal result recorded in the surviving reports. The measurable evidence centered on cocaine exposure and the fatal fall. Ramsay was a grieving employer and friend who testified about what he had observed, not a person the inquest found responsible. The distinction is uncomfortable because a legal ruling does not make the human story simple. Those close to Dempsey were left knowing something dangerous had been happening beyond what they understood during that dinner, even though the inquest did not place responsibility on them. The verdict answered the legal question: accidental death, not a finding that Ramsay caused it. But it opened a second trail. The clickbait version gets almost completely backward. Ramsay's response did not emerge as one late confession. It stretched across interviews, testimony, restaurant drug tests, and a 2-part documentary. How early did that public record begin? And what did he eventually do that affected roughly 750 employees? 5 weeks, 750 employees, and no silence. The public record began on June 8, 2003, about 5 weeks after Dempsey's death, not decades later. In an interview, Ramsay publicly discussed the loss and supported drug testing for restaurant recruits. Whatever else can be said about his response, that date rules out the idea that he kept the subject entirely hidden until 2017. Ramsay also connected Dempsey's death to a fear he already knew through his younger brother Ronnie. In that 2003 interview, Ramsay said Ronnie began using substance at 16 and was addicted to substance by 19. That family history did not explain Dempsey's actions, but it helps explain why Ramsay treated cocaine in restaurants as more than an image problem. The timeline continued in July 2003, when Ramsay gave evidence at the inquest. Then, roughly 14 years after the death, He Made Gordon Ramsay on Cocaine, a two-part documentary whose first episode aired at 9 p.m. on October 19, 2017. It was not his first public statement about Dempsey. It was the largest and most visible extension of a response already on record. By then, Ramsay said he was responsible for approximately 750 employees in London. He ordered staff and customer toilets in his restaurants swabbed for traces of cocaine. That moved his response beyond proposed screening for future recruits and into existing workplaces, although the description of the testing and its results still came from Ramsay himself, not an independently published report. In his Radio Times interview, Ramsay claimed traces appeared in every tested location except one. Because that result was presented through Ramsay's account rather than a published scientific survey, it cannot carry the same independent weight. Does ordering cocaine swabs across multiple restaurants count as meaningful accountability if the evidence ultimately remains his own account? The documentary pushed his investigation far beyond London. It followed him through South and Central America and included his participation in a Colombian anti-narcotics operation. That scope showed what Ramsay wanted the project to become, not only a memorial to Dempsey, but an attempt to trace cocaine from production and trafficking back to the restaurant bathrooms where he believed it was being used. These steps cannot prove how widespread cocaine was across his businesses. They do prove something narrower and significant. Ramsay was speaking about Dempsey within weeks, testifying within months, and still publicly confronting the subject 14 years later. The evidence describes a long response shaped by grief, family experience, and responsibility for hundreds of workers, not one delayed revelation. Ramsay's actions show a long response, but they still come from one famous man interpreting his own industry. The final escalation comes from outside his story. Researchers at Bournemouth University and the University of Strathclyde contacted 86 Michelin-starred head chefs and interviewed 54 over 12 months, creating an independent record of why stimulants were used behind elite kitchen doors. Did that study support the culture Ramsay described? The 54 chefs who made the story bigger. Yes, but with a crucial limit. The 54 chef study supported Ramsay's description of substances being used inside elite kitchens, while proving nothing about what caused David Dempsey's individual choices. That separation is the key to the entire story. Industry evidence can expose a culture without turning one employer into the cause of one person's death. The research appeared in March 2018 in Volume 70 of the International Journal of Hospitality Management. Charalampos Giosampasoglu and Lorraine Brown from Bournemouth University's Department of Tourism and Hospitality worked with John Cooper of the University of Strathclyde Business School. Over 12 months, they sent 86 invitations and interviewed 54 Michelin-starred head chefs. That produced a 63% response rate and covered approximately half the target population of Michelin-starred head chefs in Britain and Ireland. The pattern those chefs described was direct. Cocaine and amphetamines could be used to maintain performance, while alcohol was commonly used to decompress after work. In plain language, stimulants helped some chefs keep going. Then alcohol helped them come down. Those findings are serious, but the method has boundaries. These were qualitative interviews, meaning the researchers gathered detailed accounts of experiences and behavior rather than calculating a precise substance use rate for every chef. The study can identify a repeated mechanism inside demanding kitchens. It cannot tell us what percentage of all chefs use cocaine, and it cannot retrospectively diagnose Dempsey. A second study showed that the concern was not limited to Michelin-starred leaders. Published in December 2014 in Volume 21 of the Journal of Hospitality and Tourism Management, it used 9 focus groups involving 69 trainee chefs from 2 technical colleges in New South Wales. The group included 43 men and 26 women, with most participants between 18 and 24 years old. Researchers Ken Pidd, Anne Roach, and Victoria Kostadinov examined how workplace stress, access to substances and alcohol, and social norms could facilitate substance use. Focus groups are guided group discussions that help reveal shared pressures and attitudes. They are useful for understanding how a workplace culture operates, but they do not prove that every trainee behaved the same way. Together, the two studies make the Ramsay story larger without making the accusation stronger. They support the existence of dangerous coping patterns in high-pressure kitchens. They also leave Dempsey's personal reasons unresolved. Kitchen stress, easy access, and occupational norms may create conditions where substance use is easier to hide or normalize. They do not establish that Ramsay caused Dempsey to use cocaine. Taken together, the evidence leaves a harder conclusion than the title's blame narrative. The coroner recorded an accident. The contemporary profile said nobody explicitly blamed Ramsay. Ramsay spoke within weeks, and two later studies showed that substance use could be reinforced by kitchen stress, access, and workplace norms. If there was no final confession and no legal finding against him, what truth did Gordon Ramsay actually reveal? The truth Gordon Ramsay finally revealed was not a confession after being blamed. On September 23, 2003, Westminster coroner Paul Knapman recorded accidental death after the inquest heard that Dempsey's blood contained 1.36 milligrams of cocaine per liter, compared with 0.9 as a severe toxicity reference. Did Ramsay's restaurant testing confront that culture or merely expose it? Comment below.